Welcome to Stratwatch, guys. Here in episode 6, we'll be covering Gale Force Esports versus Team Liquid on Hollywood for the Agents Rising tournament. Specifically, Gale Force Esports was able to effectuate a full hold against Team Liquid where other teams were not able to at this point. I would like to note that this will be a little bit of a longer episode, guys, as we'll be covering the entirety of that defensive hold. And since it occurs over across the entire map, I want to emphasize the idea that full holds will never always occur on one point or at the beginning of the map. That it is important that you use the entire map, use different compositions, and exploit the time on the clock to make it harder for the offense to actually effectively execute a push. Lastly, guys, before I get into the episode, I want you guys to know if you have any thoughts or suggestions on topics or ideas for this series, please do let me know. I'm always looking for more ideas to cover, and it is nice to know what you guys want to see so that I can cover the topics that you guys are looking for. Without further ado, we'll go ahead and get into episode 6 and looking to shut out the offense. Here in episode 6, guys, we're going to be focusing again on the idea of defensive stalling and how to actually effectuate a full defensive hold. The concepts that you'll need to be thinking about throughout this episode as we go through it are first of all that your composition matches the part of the map that you are trying to play. Gale Force Esports is going to use 3 different compositions throughout this map to stall out Team Liquid and to make it harder in each subsequent section to actually get a meaningful offense going. The second thing I want to point out is that the way that one of the critical ways that the defense can get an advantage or an onus over the offense in a game like Overwatch where the offense is inherently favored is that you do stall them and you do bleed them time, and eventually it gets to the point where they have to rush in and not effectuate proper initiations or proper setups. When you're able to do this, it puts the the offense in a position where they have to be too aggressive and they can't properly think about or execute or have the time to set up their advances. Gale Force Esports on this first composition is specifically going to be using a double builder with 2 hit scans and 2 supports. I want to emphasize that at the beginning here, this lineup's goal is primarily stall. The double builder's ability to ramp, which we'll cover in just a second, is what allows Team Gale Force to be able to take some of these fights much easier. Here in the first fight, normally what you'll see in Overwatch in the higher level competitive play right now is pure aggression, and that's exactly what happens here. Zombs pushing out using that flashbang, but it backfires. Torque picking up the kill on Zombs leaves the offense falling apart. The charge quickly happens from JKW and Torque gets a second kill, JKW gets a kill, and now Joe Meister is going to clean up. But what I want to emphasize here, and obviously you can go back and watch and see how that offense gets dissected by that charge and other plays by the defense. The armor is what is critical to these kinds of setups. This is a ramping style of defense. As you win more fights with Torbjorn, you get more scrap, which makes more armor, which gets more health, which makes it even harder for the offense to get kills and to win the fights. So this ramping effect is something that will be very important throughout the episode, and I want you, or throughout this first part, and I want you guys to remember that the armor, we'll go ahead and pause right here and emphasize that the armor goes to the targets that are most important to the defense. Normally you would want to give it to your Mercy, and that is very important, but I want to emphasize that Harblue and Torque are the ones to pick up the armor here, as winning the next fight is going to come down to their ability to get up in the faces of Team Liquid and fight them up close around the turret with flashbangs, with fans, and if they can win that fight, again there will be more scrap, which leads to more HP, and that starts piling up on the ground. So again, in the second fight, the aggression is going to happen. Dummy understands that they need to get into the back, and they need to take out this turret. But what they don't do, or what they don't see, is the Gale Force Esports is set up all in that cafe area. When Dummy pushes in, the entirety of the team is set up to the right, and just immediately pushes out towards the left, and surrounds the offense and cleans them up. Meanwhile, while that was going on, you'll see just right there, Joe Meister looks at him, but Torque, making a strong individual play, actually flanks the offense and takes out Dahang, and if you go back, you can see it at 99% of his charge on his ultimate, preventing any resurrection from going out. As soon as all of that happens in conjunction, the offense just falls apart and there's nothing for them to do. But again, this entire time you need to be seeing that the HP on the defense is going up. There's more for them to be able to use. This third fight is actually an example of how important it is that you properly spam. We're going to go back here and we're going to look at this for a second, guys. And we're going to slow it down when we get to the point where Dahang is pushing in. For just a second, I want you guys to look and pay attention primarily to Dahang. The spam from Symmetra and the combination of the Fire Strike right here are able to take out Dahang before he gets that resurrection off again. Since the hang goes down and is unable to have that resurrection, it makes it much harder for the offense to be able to get in and get a meaningful fight. They then use the Emperor's Sight to see the flank happening by AZK. They dispense Torque to take care of him, and then here with the orb from Joe Meister and the left click, they're able to take him out. The Widow duel goes to Nicholas, and this is the third fight, and it's going to be completely cleaned up. However, this next fight is going to be the fight the Gale Force ends up losing the point. Personally, I think after watching this a few times, I think that it comes down to that they used too many ultimates in that previous fight. They really didn't have a good understanding of how the offense was pushing in here. They knew they were coming from behind, but they didn't have the best way to respond to it. The turret's set up to the far left, Torque is over to the far left, and so they don't have the best response to the situation in front of them. So they end up losing multiple heroes and bleeding into a spawn trap. But before we get into that, I want to emphasize this idea, guys, that you see that they are spreading out the offense and they are manipulating the way they push in. They either go through storage and they get funneled in there, or they go back around the back of the building and use the dumpster to prevent damage from being taken onto the offense. And that ends up being the best choice that Team Liquid makes in this game. The second thing that is very important is that Torbjorn and Symmetra are consistently changing the positions of their turrets and sentries so that the offense never knows exactly what they're pushing into. That kind of misinformation makes it much harder for them to effectively push in and concentrate their fire on the targets they need to. Lastly, on this specific idea of what they did right in this defense, I want to emphasize again that idea of ramping building defenses. If you're going to run a builder defense, it is important that you win that first and second fight, because when you win the first and second fight, you get scrap, which turns into armor, which makes more HP, which makes it harder for the offense to win the next fight because of that more HP, which leads to more armor. Note that even if your entire team is armored, Torbjorn can just start throwing armor packs on the ground and start stockpiling the HP that's available to them. Lastly, or very, very much lastly this time, guys, is I want to say that you need to accept the fact that you will never get full holds on the first point consistently. Gale Force Esports does this and understands this and backs off and does bleed a few heroes to that spawn trap like I was mentioning, but they do back up and they do set up a full hold. Dummy does exactly what you expect out of the offense after you take a hold, pushing out, killing Torque, but he ends up going down himself. And so this is where we get into the next part of the analysis and part 2 as they are exploiting the map. Here in Hollywood for the second point, notice the massive difference in the map. The two verticality levels, you have the building we're staring at right now, the third level, you have the second level, and you have the ground floor. Gale Force Esports is going to ditch the builders and going to set up with a double DPS lineup, only having a Widow and Genji as far as pure damage goes, and they're going to exploit the mobility and angles that this lineup allows them to have. Here in this first push-up by the side of Team Liquid, Gale Force Esports waits and waits. They set up on the left and right, and when there's finally a tag on AZK, Torque goes in. Torque jumps down from that left building, cleans up AZK, and then starts dashing around to create a hectic situation in the fight. The intentional part of this, though, or the individual play that I really want to emphasize of this fight, is that JKW and Harblu, during that fight, actually push through the entirety of the fight and power through it, and it is hard to watch, so if you need to pay very close attention. But right here they'll start swinging and going deeper into the fight, and what they end up doing is turning around and getting a very strong Earth Shatter. And that very strong Earth Shatter, which happened just a little bit ago, is going to allow them to get 2 picks chained by the other 2 picks, and eventually the offense is going to get cleaned up and stalled out completely. So after winning the first fight, Gale Force Esports is going to exploit the second part of this map that is incredibly important, which is this whole verticality. You're going to see Nicholas go off here as he first picks off AZK, and then he's going to go over here and win the Widow duel. It is very important that you understand that maps with high degrees of verticality are a playground for Widowmaker, and that exploiting this kind of concept, with specifically in this instance the Widowmaker and the verticality, is something that will give you more edges in your games. Specifically, Team Liquid recognizes this, and they say that we need to get control of the high ground. If we don't have control of the high ground, then it just seems like we're going to get picked apart as we try to push in, surrounded, and jumped on. So they do go for the high ground here. They end up bifurcating the fight by using the Winstons to jump into the high ground and spread out the defense. One of the Winstons zones back the top, and the other Winston stays on the payload with the McCree and the Genji. Note here that specifically one of the Winstons, it was Dummy, literally charges to his death to make sure that they get down Shake on the Mercy. It gives Macerar the opportunity to help clean it up, but ultimately the big thing to focus there is that he literally doesn't stop trying to chase Mercy until he dies. The offense ends up cleaning up here. They end up having a very strong fight, primarily because they did effectively bifurcate it. But I want to note that this entire time that Harblu is still around. You'll notice him jumping back and forth on the left, and that's what sets up this fight right here. Right as the Earthshatter is coming out from JKW, it's incredibly important to note that Harblu, although he does go for the health pack here, could have jumped down like he did at this time and used the Earthshatter to deal additional damage to the side of the offense. He ends up going back and getting the health pack, but the defense ends up getting a very strong hold here. As they do pick up the kill on to AZK, they end up cleaning up a few more kills, and yes, the resurrection ends up coming out from Dehang, but Dehang had to use it because he was about to die. So the resurrection, it doesn't end up being the highest value, and it ends up being a situation where once again, Gale Force Esports is able to effectuate a hold. Specifically though here, it is important to note that the coordination between JKW and Harblu is what kind of set up that fight in the first place, and that the big thing is that their target focus in that specific instance is incredibly important, that they kill the targets that are not being resurrected during the resurrection, and that as soon as the resurrection is over, that they refocus down AZK. So again, onto this fourth fight here, and onto this high ground. A small thing that you can take note in your duo queues or games with friends is that if you have a Widowmaker player, like Nicholas here, you'll notice that while Zoms is looking for the peak, before they use the infra sight from the defense, the Winston is actually taking the peaks for the Widowmaker to see where the enemy Widowmaker is. This makes it so it's hard to actually pick. Zoms can't shoot the other Winston to be able to stop the peak. So there's a free amount of information that Nicholas gets before he has to actually use his infra sight. So here in this third fight, after that pick, they're going to be able to clean up as there isn't any backup fire from Zoms. Vonathil ends up going down, and the fight just gets spread apart, and Torque, once again, is going off in this portion of the map. I want to emphasize that there's only 2 DPS in this fight, and that those 2 DPS need to perform. And so far, you have seen Nicholas perform, and in the kill feed, if you've been watching, Torque has been doing a lot of the damage. So what did they do right? They exploited the verticality. They have a highly mobile lineup, and it's completely different than the first lineup. So let's go ahead and recap, as they are going to end up losing this fight here, and partly I think it's because of some anxiousness, maybe out of Torque or maybe out of the team in general. But Torque ends up using his Dragon Blade and going in as JKW does, but JKW lands on the landing here on the left, and his Earthshatter comes after Torque dies, as you can see right here. But again, you want to stop the offense from ever getting high ground control. That is one thing that Gale Force does right. Again, emphasizing this idea they only have 2 DPS. It is important that if you're going to run a low DPS lineup with high control like this, that your DPS gets a lot of work done when they have the opportunity. And finally, something that was not noted yet, but is something small that you can go back and watch. Notice the way that Gale Force engages. Gale Force will never engage in such a way that they are preventing the payload from moving too far. Gale Force Esports seems to almost purposely let the payload continually push up so that when they do go for the defensive holds, they're able to have or force the offense to push up farther to get to the objective, making it even more difficult to actually get onto the objective with a full set of HP and a full set of a full offense. So let's move into part 3, guys, as part 3 will be the actual complete hold that Gale Force will be executing. I want to emphasize in this specific section that what will win you these fights is crisis management. The ability to see what is going on when everything is hectic and hellish and still be able to make the best possible plays. Gale Force Esports does an excellent job of this, and in my opinion is the reason why they win this part. Specifically, the composition they switch to is something they haven't done as often. If you go back and watch their games, it is something they've done before. They'll have Harblu flex over onto a Reaper so that he can get into the backline. Both of the DPS being, or the other 2 DPS being McCree's, makes this lineup have a strong amount of burst, a decent amount of mid-range poke, but more so, and you'll see in a moment, I want to highlight it, that Reaper and McCree's burst damage and sustain damage as they are able to continue firing and output a fair bit of damage. But the big thing is that Reaper is able to get in the back of these fights, and he can survive independently of a support, which allows him to manipulate the way that the back line is seeing the fight from Team Liquid and gives his frontliners, the double McCree and the Reinhardt, more opportunities to get better fights. So specifically Harblue here again, being a critical player in this portion of the defense, is going to coordinate with his team pushing out onto the main corridor with the speed boost to get onto Dehane here on the Mercy. Once again, as a story of earlier, Dehane goes down with Resurrection available and is not able to use it. They then focus down the tank and then the DPS, making it almost impossible for Team Liquid to get back together and fight. So that right there was just a strong instance of seeing what they needed to do. With only a minute remaining on the clock, this is where Gale Force Esports is going to be making every single fight count. Notice here that Zom switches to a Widowmaker. He needs to be able to get a pick. Team Liquid assesses the situation and says that if they don't get a pick and start snowballing, the game is probably over. But this is again where I want to emphasize two things. There will be two parts that you guys need to watch during this fight. The first part is that Zoms will be zoned on the main screen completely by Reaper. And this prevents Zoms from ever taking a shot at the offense or the defense during this time. The second thing I want to note is the small individual decisions coming out of Nicholas and Torque. The two Reinhardts end up earth-shattering each other, and the supports in the Reinhardts get stunned. But the two McCrees on the side of the defense in the picture-in-picture to the right go ahead and move to the boxes to that left side and are able to avoid the earth shatter and get multiple kills during the earth shatter that are unanswered. And here it goes as the earth shatter. They move around to the left, they use those flashbangs, Torque gets that triple kill, and it makes it incredibly hard for the offense to actually get in here and do anything. They don't even need to really use the Resurrection, even though Shake does end up using it, as the only one that was really left to push here was Zoms. Once they clean up the two heroes on the payload, they end up cleaning up this fight, and they end up taking it. But again, I want to point out that small mid-fight decision between the McCrees. That is the crisis management that we are talking about. There is no way that you have the time that I do during these analysis videos, or you guys do while watching these, to make that decision in your head precognitively as a player. So instead, that split-second intuitive decision that they make, that crisis management, ends up winning them the fight. So again, I want to emphasize this whole idea of the crisis management, as in this last fight, it comes out. Specifically, they use the Reinhardt charge to activate the Deadeye, which we'll see in a second. But they use the communication and teamwork from each other. Nicholas, again, with this Deadeye, you'll see. He does, AZK ends up taking down Torque, and this is where, again, this crisis management, Nicholas and Shake evaluate the situation. He ends up throwing out the flashbang, which occurs during the Death Blossom, and you can go back and watch, and I apologize for pausing there. You can go back and watch, but the flashbang occurs at the same time as the Death Blossom, and he purposely dies, or puts himself in a position to die, so when the Resurrection goes off, the Resurrection gets two players, both of the McCrees. This ends up getting 3 kills, and the Resurrection from the offense ends up getting cleaned up because they didn't get as much value out of that ability, because they didn't coordinate it as well and manage the crisis situation as effectively as the side of Gale Force Esports. So again, guys, I want to emphasize that last part of crisis management and being able to see the fight clearly and being able to make the best decision possible at the time. So a quick recap overall of this entire episode, if you want to look at it that way. There are 3 concepts that you guys could go back and watch again and see throughout this offense. The first is that you need to always be accepting the fact that you will not get a hold at the beginning of the map. If it happens, and that is amazing. But you always need to be in the back of your head planning out the entirety of the map, what heroes you're going to play in each section, and using a different comp, as we saw Gale Force do, for each different section to exploit the potential of each different section. First a builder comp, then a mobility verticality comp, and then a burst teamfight control comp for the last section. Again, I also want to emphasize this idea that if you bleed time from the defense or offense consistently, it ends up putting the offense in a position where the final portions of the map, they only have a minute or two. Going into this last section, Team Liquid literally had 2 minutes and 1 second at the point of the cap to actually be able to win the game. That means that they only have so many fights, and that if they mis-execute those fights, the defense is going to be able to get a full hold. So again, guys, thank you so much for watching this week's episode. I apologize for it coming out late. I want to get more episodes out to you guys, and I want to set up a way so that I can get 2 episodes to you every week. I will be working on that schedule, and so if you want to know more, please do sub to my channel. It helps me out a lot. You guys will get email notifications about these episodes and about my casting that I've been uploading to my YouTube channel, and that helps me out a lot. The second thing, guys, if you're interested in knowing more about me or more about the content I'm doing, my casting, please follow me on Twitter, which will be linked below in the description at RaptorZOW, as that gives you immediate updates about what I'm doing, if I'm streaming, if I'm casting, or when I'm starting to film the episodes. And lastly, again, guys, I want to emphasize thank you so much for watching these episodes. I hope to improve this series over time and make this series into a staple that you guys can use to become better players, both at any level, starting at the beginning, or as you move into competitive play if that's what you want to do. If you guys have any suggestions, thoughts, feedback, or ideas on this series, please do let me know, as the best way for me to improve is to listen to you guys. Thank you so much again for watching episode 6 of Stratwatch, and I hope to see you guys on the next episode as well as my casts in the future.